Hello BookTube, I regret wearing this shirt today. This is Weekly Reads. My reading plan for this week was to complete the collected poems of Frank O'Hara, and then move on to Legacy of Violence, A History of the British Empire by Carolyn Elkins. That did not quite come to pass. I did manage to finish the collected poems of Frank O'Hara. However, to make this weekly reads make a bit more narrative sense than a chronological look at my reading would normally do, I'm going to focus on the bales first, and then move on from there after I deal with my eyelashes. Okay. So, the first bale of the week, because I do have 3 bales to talk about, is Lord Hades' Ruthless Marriage, Volume 1 by Ueji, Yuho. So this is shoujo manga. It's a romance series. It's one of the 9 billion retellings of the Hades Persephone myth, and I hated it. So the thing about Lord Hades' Ruthless Marriage is that in this iteration of Hades, he refuses to marry. He is the ruthless lord of the underworld. He does not need a queen. However, one day he is struck by Eros' arrow, and the first person he sees, he will fall in love with. So he starts off the first chapter blindfolded. However, while he's in his personal chambers, he removes the blindfold, and in drops Persephone from the world above. And that starts off her attempting to court him. And then a whole bevy of other weird stuff comes in, and so why did I pick this up? Well, for one thing, I am very interested in Greek mythology, although the modern retellings of Greek mythology have largely left me very cold. Outside of the retellings in the style of like Stephen Fry's Mythos or Sarah Iles Johnston's Gods and Mortals. But the more novelistic retellings haven't really worked for me. So the other thing that really drew me to this series and to trying to read this volume is that I really liked the artwork. The artwork is lovely, but unfortunately I'm just not that into the storytelling. Particularly the depictions of the other gods, like Zeus and Hera, and particularly Athena. That the depiction of Athena in this volume just really, really annoyed me. So, yeah. So I think at some point I will be passing this on at my next book purge, which I've already got about 7 boxes of books already ready to go. So I will, once they're gone, I'll start working on a new spate of unhauls, even though I should, by that point, have more space. But anyway, so that was the first bale. The second bale was Legacy of Violence by Carolyn Elkins. So this is a history of the British Empire, looking at it through the lens of violence within the empire. and particularly, I think, violence as it relates to the contradictions inherent in an empire driven by liberal ideology. And so this book came out in 2022, I think relatively early, but it took me a few months to get to it. And when I finally got to it, I read the introduction and was seriously put off of it. And I bailed within the first few paragraphs of the first chapter. And that's what happened this time too. I read parts of the introduction and I was seriously put off. And then I kind of skipped the rest of the introduction and moved on to the first chapter. And again, I was immediately put off by the first paragraphs of the first chapter. So I bailed. And I don't know what it is, but I find Carolyn Elkins' style of writing just so off-putting and just counterproductive in a way. Because, I mean, Carolyn Elkins has made a career out of studying the dark side of the British Empire, particularly the Mau Mau Rebellion in Kenya. But I don't know. I do not get on with her style. So I think I'm going to pass this along at some point and probably avoid anything else by Carolyn Elkins. And hopefully at some point I might find a good critical history of the British Empire that is not completely off-putting. Because I am no fan of the British Empire, but when your intent is to give a critical history of the British Empire, and yet your style is making me root for the British Empire, there's a problem. And I don't know if it's just certain stylistic techniques that generally work for certain readers just doesn't work for me or on me. I don't know. It would be something, I guess, to look into and maybe give a lot more thought to, but probably not in the weekly reads, which I have to kind of hurry up because there's a lot more to talk about, which is what happens when my plans do not go to fruition, and I have a lot of other things to talk about because there's a lot more to talk about. So the next book I bailed on was The Swimming Pool Library by Alan Hollinghurst. So this is Hollinghurst's first novel, and one of my plans for 2024 was to read all 6 of his novels that are currently in publication. There is a 7th one that's coming out in October, which wouldn't count, but that plan stops at The Swimming Pool Library, which I bailed on. It's like every other attempt I make of reading this book ends in a bail. And I think part of it is that I'm very contradictory in my thoughts on this book. There are parts of this book that I dearly cherish and enjoy. The characters, the world building, even though this is a realistic novel. But I'm not fond of the plot. And this time the plot, I started to pick it apart. And really, I was in a combative mood this week, I guess. So I decided to set this aside as well. And I've already talked a lot about this book. On Wednesday when I did my dropping video of this reading project. But to recap what the book is about, The Swimming Pool Library is a gay novel set in 1983 London. Will Beckwith is a 25-year-old, very wealthy gay man who spends his time working out and having sex. As the novel opens, he is on the back end of a week-long relationship, or I guess you could say a week-long stand, with a younger gay man named Arthur. When Will's out cruising, and he ends up saving the life of a cottaging elderly gay aristocrat named Lord Nantwich. Later on, the two meet at their health club, and this strikes up a friendship between the two as Lord Nantwich takes Will under his wing. And Nantwich teaches Will the early and mid 20th century gay history in Britain, and also offers Will the job of writing his biography. However, there are ulterior motives in Nantwich's mentorship. And this sort of ends in a betrayal. There are a number of other subplots, namely Will's relationship with Arthur, that Arthur believes that he has killed a friend of his brother, so he has to hide out. And then later, Will takes up with a young bodybuilder at his health club named Phil. And then Will's best friend James has a relationship, or at least that's what I interpreted it as, is the intention of a relationship with a young man who turns out to be a cop who arrests James for solicitation, which I've never quite understood how that worked. I mean, maybe it was just, it's Thatcher's Britain, but still, I don't understand how that worked. And that also ends up in a betrayal at the end, which, I mean, the ending has always put me off. But, yeah, so, I don't know. Anyway, but this time it was a bail. And I will put you there. Okay, so that ends the bail. So now on to the poetry. So I did manage to finish the collected poems of Frank O'Hara on Saturday. And on one hand, I am happy that I did. It was a struggle. It was a slog. Frank O'Hara is a major American poet of the mid-20th century, and I have to say I'm not all that fond of his work. There are some poems that I quite liked, but there's a lot that left me a bit cold. Now, I don't know necessarily if it's one thing reading slim volumes of poetry, and it's another reading a big, fat, collected edition of a poet's work. So I'm not entirely sure. But it was a slog, but I'm pleased that I did manage to finish it. Now, after I read Frank O'Hara, I went and did Lord Hades' Ruthless Marriage. And then on Sunday, after I bailed on Legacy of Violence, I was quite depressed. So I read some poetry. And then over the course of the work week, after I bailed on the Swimming Pool Library, I read more of those specific poets' works. So over the course of this reading week, I have read the complete works of Peter Campion, which are Other People, The Lions, which is what I read on Sunday, Dorado, which I read yesterday, and One Summer Evening at the Falls, which I also read on Wednesday. So let's start with The Lions. So The Lions, I think, is my favorite collection of Peter Campion's. I've read this several times since I added it to my library, and every time I really enjoy this collection. Other People, I think, is okay, but I think after this batch of readings, it's probably my least favorite of the four. Dorado was really good. I was rather down on Thursday, and this volume definitely perked me up, and I think it's probably my second favorite. And One Summer Evening at the Falls is also really good, although the first time or two I read this collection, I wasn't as fond of it as I have since become. And this one also really perked me up. So, that was a very fun reading experience. Rereading all of these I think this is the second time I've just read all of his work. But I've read several of these collections multiple times, as I am wont to do. And there are a number of poems that I wish I could have made, like those poetry videos that a lot of booktubers read poetry on Thursdays, and I kind of wish I'd done that. But anyway. But I also read during this week the complete works of, except for she has a chapbook that I don't have, which is published by somebody other than LSU. But I read the three works of Catherine Carter, or Catherine W. Carter. So The Memory of Gills, which I read on Wednesday. No, I read this on Tuesday. I read that on Tuesday after I bailed on the swimming pool library. Because the swimming pool library was Monday, and then a part of Tuesday when I decided to bail on it, and then I read I did Memory of Gills on Wednesday. I don't remember how I did this. Because I do know I read these in backwards. So, and I also read The Swamp Monster at Home and Larvae of the Nearest Stars, which is what I read on Sunday before I read The Lions. So, I love this collection. This is absolutely one of my favorite collections, and I was quite depressed on Sunday after I bailed on Legacy of Violence, and this collection really perked me up. I just absolutely love so many of the poems in this collection. And I'm also quite fond of The Swamp Monster at Home, but I think this would be my second favorite of her work, and then The Memory of Gills is probably my least favorite of her work. So, yeah. So I'm quite pleased I reread all of, relatively speaking, Catherine W. Carter. And that leads to today. And I read 3 volumes of manga, although I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time talking about these 3 volumes because I'm already at almost 20 minutes in this video. So I read the first 3 volumes of Tokyo Ghoul by Sui Ishida. This is volume 1. This is volume 2, and this is volume 3. So, Tokyo Ghoul is set in a world much like our own, with the main difference being that there's a subset of humanity who are ghouls. Basically, they are a species of human-like beings who can only subsist on eating human meat. So they eat humans. One day, a young college student named Ken Kaneki, the young man on the cover, is at a coffee shop, and he is approached by a young woman that he has a crush on, and she talks to him, and they agree to go out on a date. And while they're out on their date, this young woman attacks him. She is a ghoul. However, she is killed in what appears to be an accident, and to save Ken's life, the doctor transplants some of her organs into Ken, and this leads him to become a partial ghoul. He can no longer satisfactorily eat human food. Human food tastes horrific to him, and he's drawn to eating human meat. However, he resists that because he wishes to remain human. And gradually, over the course of this volume and into the second volume, Ken gradually begins to accept that things are not going to be the same, and that he needs help to adapt to his new way of being. And he begins to meet the other ghouls in his neighborhood, the 20th ward of Tokyo. And he eventually joins the coffee shop, which is actually run by ghouls and largely patronized by ghouls who look for means of sustenance outside of hunting and killing humans. However, not all ghouls are all that friendly. Also, in the second and third volume, there's a unit of the Japanese police force, or the Tokyo police force, who are devoted to tracking down and executing ghouls. And they're very unpleasant. Although I guess if you're looking at it from a human perspective, they're well-intentioned extremists, although they're also quite genocidal and also unethical. So I really liked my reread of Volume 1. It's quite entertaining, it's quite interesting, and I really like what Ishida does with Ken's character. Volumes 2 and 3, I didn't enjoy them as much. Particularly, I think, Volume 3, as the series is, rather than being about Ken's sort of struggle and coming to terms with and integrating and trying to balance his human and ghoul sides and involving himself in ghoul society, is about the focus here is more on the human investigators. And that just, I didn't quite enjoy it as much, I think, because they're given tools that, since this is meant to be our world, just with ghouls in it, that I never quite bought that one investigator has a giant hammer weapon, and the other one basically is collecting ghoul weapons of some form or other. It just, that didn't quite work out for me. So I'm not entirely sure if I'm going to continue with the series or not. I mean, I love the artwork, and some of the story is really affecting, but I'm not entirely sure I'm all that happy with where their story is going. So there's that, and I'll show you some real quick pictures of the volume. See if I can get some. So I do want to show you there. So yeah, so I mean the artwork is lovely. So anyway, so that was Tokyo Ghoul, volumes 1 through 3. And that leads me to what I'll be reading this coming reading week. Hopefully my plans work out a lot better than they did this past week. Although, I mean, it was surprising that I did not get on with Legacy of Violence, which I should have figured. But now it's confirmed, so I can, okay, I'm not going to try it again. I'm just going to get rid of it. And the swimming pool library bummed me out. But I mean, the poetry was really good. So there's that. And so next week. So over the course of the weekend, I'm hoping to read Alexandria, the City That Changed the World by Issa. This is a history of Alexandria in Egypt. And over the course of the work week, I'm hoping to read Brotherhood of Kings, How International Relations Shaped the Ancient Near East by Amanda H. Podany. So this is a look at the relationship between the great kingdoms in the late Bronze Age, which is a subject that I have a definite sweet tooth for. And I'm hoping Podany's style in this book is as vibrant and as lively as her history of the period Weavers, Scribes, and Kings. So, yeah, that's my plans for this coming week. As far as videos are concerned, I'm not entirely sure. There's a new tag out that I would like to try to do. And maybe there'll be some discussion videos I'll be able to do, and maybe some other things. So, anyway, BookTube, until I see you next week, thank you. Have a great rest of your evening and weekend, and stay safe.